Now, as we explore the zodiac, the first attribute we come into contact with is Aries. Now, let me explain Aries from a metaphysical position. When we break down the letters of Aries, it breaks down to the number 7. When we think about the number 7, we think about detachment. Also, the attribute that's associated with Aries is image, but not just any image, your self-image. So we're going to put self in parentheses, image. Now, on the surface, these two attributes contradict each other. What does detachment have to do with your self-image? It seems as if your self-image should be grounded in something more physical instead of your self-image being grounded, or the foundation of your self-image being based in detachment. How does that even make sense? Let us dig a little deeper. Now, Aries is also a cardinal sign. A cardinal sign is when something is at its infancy stages, at the beginning. So let's write that down. The beginning of what? Aries represent the beginning of sparks of light. Now, when we explore other fire signs, such as Leo and Sagittarius, we'll see the difference between the beginning, the middle, or the preservation, and the end. But for now, we're going to stick to the beginning. The beginning of a flame or the beginning of fire are the sparks of light that emanate from the fire before the temperature hits a certain degree. Now, let's write this down and illustrate it. So we know a spark comes from friction. That friction is generating heat. Friction, you can say, is traveling sound. Because we know that light is a manifestation of sound frequency. Without sound, there is no light. Before anything, there was the word. The word brings forth the light. Going back to the spark, as we said, it represents temperature, but it also represents activating atoms, or the activation of atoms. Now, what does it mean for atoms to be activated? The activation of atoms mean that they increase in speed or whirling. So we know when we think about atoms, you have the proton, the neutron, and the electron. So when the atoms become activated or heated due to friction, it increases the rate of speed that the electron is whirling around the nucleus. So the speed increases. So as the speed increases, it's going to manifest as traveling sound or a traveling frequency. Now, when we put all this together, all of this, the increasing speed, the traveling sound, the heat, the friction, the sparks of light, the self-image, the cardinal, the Aries, when we put all this together, what's going to manifest is an image. So when you have sound frequency, it's going to generate an image. Now, when we think about image, what is an image? An image can be said to be a glyph. Or in other words, a hieroglyph. So we just put this above here. A hieroglyph. A hiero means a flame. A flamed image or a flamed burning of a thought. So for example, whenever we talk about reprogramming the subconscious mind, what do you have to do? You have to burn an image into your subconscious mind. That sound or that frequency must travel to the subconscious mind in a heated activation because it increases the speed or the whirling of the atom, which allows the subconscious to be penetrated with your intentions. And that penetration of intentions will generate an image. And that image that is generated will be your self-image, because your self-image is rooted in the hieroglyphs that are within sound. Sound creates images. There's no way around it. Sound generates images. Whatever number we can think about, 111, 222, 333, 444, 555, any number combination is associated with an image. That's also what a mantra is. A mantra generates an image. That image is whatever that mantra means. So you have certain mantras that connect with certain energies, and when you connect with that imagery, by chanting those mantras, it can affect the subconscious mind because it is activating the atoms. It is heating up the atoms, which is increasing the speed, which increases the whirling, which allows the subconscious mind to be penetrated, and it's going to generate an image or hieroglyphs that is association with that sound frequency. Now, taking it a step further, what is self? Because we talked about the image, but what is self? And how is self different from I? Now, what do I mean by that? Because we're going to break down Aries with supreme mathematics and supreme alphabet. And when we do that, we're going to come into I, and we're going to also come into self. Now, for those who don't know what I mean, let me illustrate it. So we have Aries. Aries breaks down to Allah, ruler, I, equality, self/savior. Now, we've broken down these things before, but I didn't go into detail. So we see the S represents self and the I represents I. Now, what is the difference between the I and the self? Let's explore those. When we think about the self is neutral. Why do I say that the self is neutral? Now again, I may be spelling this shit wrong. And if I am, that's because I'm going strictly off of how the word sounds. So one of these spellings is right. It is Neutral or Neurtal. It's one of these. But to stop the confusion, because I don't want to misspell these words any longer, I'm going to look up the correct spelling so that we don't have any confusion. So let me not even pretend like I know the correct spelling. Let me look it up and we'll go further. We can't be having the misspelling of words. So I'm looking this up as we speak. Okay, so it's Neutral. Okay. So let me erase that. Okay, so here we go. Let me actually write this over again. I know it looked kind of weird, so let's correct that. Neutral. All right, let us continue. Now, why is self neutral? Because self can be broken down two ways. What do I mean by that? You can either be selfish or selfless. Selfish is looked upon as negative. Oh, somebody is selfish. You know, people normally look at that as something wrong or bad or a way you should not be. In reference to selflessness, which is looked at as a positive attribute. You know, be humble, respect your elders, so on and so forth. So self can be looked at from a negative perspective or a positive perspective. But we understand that both of these attributes are manifestations of self, but not the self itself. Because the self itself is neither negative or positive. It is both. It is the middle point between selfishness and selflessness. So let me illustrate that. So you have this line. On one end of the line, you have selfish. On the other end, you have selfless. The middle point is what the self is. So the self is between selfish and selfless. Most of the time we focus on the manifestations of self, but not the self itself. Now, let's take it a step forward. Because the self, you can say, is more in alignment with what we consider the soul. Why is that? Because the soul is an aspect of us that is free from sin. What do I mean by free from sin? The soul is not the aspect of yourself that does wrong, that makes mistakes, that is childish sometimes, or selfless sometimes, or selfish sometimes. The soul doesn't get caught up in the human attributes and affairs. The self is free from all misconceptions, all things that mix and dilute the truth. The soul, you can say, is the pure essence of truth. Because the soul is the pure essence of truth, it is free from sin, it is free from judgment. So although there's a lot of things going on in this world that we may not agree with or we may be in full agreement with, both are irrelevant, because whether a person is a serial killer or a priest living up in the mountains, not doing no harm to anyone, when it comes to the self does not judge because the self is free from sin, because the self is connected or is the pure essence of your soul. And that's what we have compassion for. We don't have compassion for people. We have compassion, or let me rephrase this. We don't have compassion for humanity. We have compassion for the soul. What is the difference? When we talk about humanity, it's focused on or based on being a better person. To be a better person, you would say to be a more selfless person instead of a more selfish person. However, when we're dealing with spirit and spirituality and occultism, esoteric knowledge, we're not dealing with humanity. It's not to make you more human. You don't do spiritual work or alchemy, which is referred to as the great work, if you want a reference point to what spirituality is or what spiritual work is, it is within the context of alchemy referring to the great work, which is a complete transformation of your perspective of life. Does it mean that you are more respectful to other people per se, or less respectful of people per se? It has nothing to do with your human behaviors, because they are irrelevant, because the soul is free from sin. The soul does not care what your human attributes choose to indulge in. It is irrelevant in the greater scheme of things. Now, whatever path a person chooses to take, as we said here above, it is the middle point between selfishness and selflessness where the soul exists. Not on one side, not on the other side. Not being humble and not being arrogant. It's the middle point between. Now, let's get to I, because we talked about the self. How is the self different from I? When we think about I, because we have the capital I and we have the lowercase I. The capital is written this way. The lowercase is written this way. When we look at the lowercase, the I tends to be a point of reference. Because we see a point right here. This point is a point of reference. So whenever we talk about I, so when you say I am this or I am that, I am doing this, I am about this, I am, it's talking about a point of reference. Also, when we look at the capital I, we see that it looks like arms and legs. You have the body, the two arms, the two legs. Right? And sometimes the eye is a little like this, or sometimes it looks like a body. Right? Two arms, two legs, and a head. Now, you can say the eye is your image, because it's talking about a point of reference or a projection of the self. So we have the self, which can be referred to as the soul. But when we are dealing with the I, we're dealing with the projection of the self. The projection of the self, or the body, because the body can be said to be a projection of the self, or the point of reference. The point of reference is the projection, as opposed of the soul. This is why I is the ninth letter of the alphabet. And we know 9 represents manifest or born. So the born or the birth that is manifested from the projection of the self is the body or the image, which comes from the point of reference of self. So to wrap it all up, the difference between the self, which is the soul, versus the I, which is the projection of the self, we can see the difference here, and so that we can stop confusing all these terms and using them interchangeably and wonder why there's so much confusion and how words can be manipulated and twisted to fit whatever agenda that's being brought forth. Lastly, we're going to deal with the supreme mathematics and the supreme alphabet to finish all this off. Let's do that. So I'm actually just going to write it down here. We don't have to make this too long. So one more time. Allah, ruler. I, equality. Self-savior. So Allah is the all. Ruler is a measurement or a measurement tool. I, as we now know, is a projection of self. Equality is a homeostasis between elements or currents of energy. So whenever we deal with equality, we're dealing with the homeostasis of elements moving harmoniously or whirling harmoniously together and one common cause, or for one common cause, which is what an atom is. So Allah, or actually, of course, now we deal with Savior, which is the soul. So when we put all this together, what do we get? Allah, which is God consciousness, or everything is mental. So Allah can be a representation of all is mental. The mental ruler of I, the mental ruler of I, or the mental measurement of I, which we now know is a projection of self. The mental ruler or the mental measurement, you being able to measure with your mind the projection of yourself, is what will bring equality or a homeostasis to your elements. Being able to measure with your mind the projection of yourself brings equality to what? Your soul, because it allows the soul or the self to manifest when you are able to properly manage and measure your God consciousness. It's not enough to know you are a God, you are the all, you are Allah. You must be able to measure that or to put that to use as a tool to manipulate the projection of yourself or your body image or your image, the manipulation of your image, to harmonize the elements within your body and within the mind, the harmonization of the elements within the body and the mind. And from that harmonization, can you truly connect with the soul, the purest aspects of ourselves? Is from this process. This is the metaphysical meanings of the attributes of Aries. We out.